The Homeric tradition. The Homeric tradition took place from 1100 to 800 BC. The Homeric tradition was about believing in a multitude of gods who all interfered with human interactions to change how history and events progressed. It was believed that some events in history were predetermined. It influenced Western culture by setting a base for religion to stem off of, as well as allowed philosophers to emerge.
Thales. Thales was one of the first philosophers to shy away from the Homeric tradition. Aristotle gives him credit for his teachings that water is the source of all living things and that all things are full of God. No one knows how he came up with his conclusions, but Aristotle says that he could have been influenced by the consideration of the moisture of nutriment, and based on his conclusions on a rationalistic interpretation of the myth of oceans. He affected Western thought by his popular theorems, which revolutionized math as well as changed science with the views of how water created.
Anaximander is another early philosopher to challenge the Homeric tradition. He is credited with the teachings that the origin of all things is the infinite or the unlimited, also known as apeiron, or the boundless. He said that all living things sprang from the original moisture of the earth, where he was applied to the moisture, and then life began in the form of a fish. Then he states that the fish evolved and threw off their scales, and changed to other creatures. The apeiron is the same thing as space, as well as the mythological thought of chaos. He also states that change destroys matter, and change needs to stop. How he influenced Western thought was by creating the thought of astrology.
Xenophanes. Xenophanes states that the source of all things is wind, and proposes that there is one God and he is nothing like other humans. He believed that most of what happened on earth is a natural phenomenon and not a divine act. The Creator is in one place at all times and does not move to earth and back. He was one of the first to openly criticize the Homeric traditions. Xenophanes wondered if gods created man or if man created gods. He influenced Western thought through science and physics of earth and other celestial objects.
Heraclius. He had few doctrines. The first is the doctrine of universe flux. This states that there is no static being. There is no unchanging element. Change is the Lord of the universe, and the underlying element of the universe is fire. Fire is everything, and everything changes for fire. The second doctrine states that the change is not random, but it is uniform, orderly, and cyclic. It says that the heavenly fires were turned into vapor, water, and earth, and that they would go through another similar process as they go back into fire. His third doctrine states that it contains the elements of both old and new at any given time. For example, as night ends, day begins, or where summer begins, spring ends. He has influenced Western thought with his law of nature.
Parmenides. Parmenides composed a poem concerning nature. The poem includes 3 different sections. The first section consists of the goddess of truth and how she points out that there are 2 paths to knowledge. One path is for the knowledge of truth, and the other is for knowledge of the opinions of men. Another one is that all things are composed of opposites. He influenced Western thought with reason proof for any assertion.
Zenos. His doctrines were a contradiction of motion and plurality in space. In his arguments against motion, he states that a body must move through an infinite number of spaces in order to move from one point to another. He also says that a body which is in one place is at rest. Therefore, an arrow in its flight is at rest because at each successive moment it is in one place. His last argument is that the race between Achilles and the tortoise contradicts motion because Achilles can never overtake the tortoise. Achilles must reach the point where the tortoise started, but by that time the tortoise will have gained ground. This concept would continue forever. His arguments against plurality in space is that if everything exists in space, so space exists in space, and so on. He has influenced Western thought by laying down the foundations for modern logic.
Democritus. He was known as the laughing philosopher because of his emphasis on value of cheerfulness. He was one of 2 founders of ancient atomists and perception theory. Democritus elaborated a system that originated by his teacher Leucippus into a materialistic account of the natural world. Democritus stated that there are 2 fundamentally different kinds of realities composing the natural world, atoms and void. He believed that there are smallest indivisible bodies from which everything is composed, and that these move about in infinite void space. The work of Democritus have survived only in second-hand reports. The best evidence is reported by Aristotle, who regarded him as an important rival in natural philosophy. Parmenides argued that it is possible for there to be change without something coming from nothing. Democritus, along with pre-Socratic philosophers, argued in response to Parmenides that change is possible by showing that it does not require that something should come from nothing. He affected Western thought greatly because he did not believe in gods or afterlife. Therefore, his works were widely known and credited, and that could influence religion which they choose to practice.
Plato's allegory of the cave. Plato's allegory of the cave is very simple. He believed that every human was trapped in a cave and was narrow-minded and blind to every other idea. His allegory of the cave was like having people shown the same thing for the rest of their lives, so that that's what they believe. Once someone goes out of the cave or isn't so narrow-minded and can see other beliefs, that they will be enlightened. They won't want to go back into the cave and be forced to believe what they know isn't true. One day, one of the prisoners manages to break free and escapes the cave, where he's been all his life. He sees the real world for the first time and realizes that everything in the cave was a lie. He returns to the cave to try and convince his fellow prisoners that everything they're seeing is an illusion. He manages to convince them, but some of the others cannot be persuaded and think he's crazy. All of this is about how you shouldn't settle for imperfect and unexplored life, and how every human should be free and able to make decisions for themselves. Plato's allegory of the cave did influence Western thought. He was the founder of the famous academy in Athens and the first institution of higher learning in the Western world, which greatly affects how we think and learn today.